Police have uncovered chilling new evidence at the murder site of Brian Thompson in New York City. 3 bullet casings were recovered, each inscribed with the cryptic words, deny, defend, and depose. Could these messages be a clue to the killer's true identity? You know, when it's added to the better image of the shooter, which was collected at a nearby coffee shop, and that mobile phone along the getaway route, we might have some answers coming forward. Well, hey folks, the shocking targeted killing of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson outside of a Manhattan hotel has spurred an all-out investigation by the New York City Police Department, and it's raising significant questions about the potential motives that are tied to his role, not only as a high-ranking corporate executive, but with some interesting trades that have been going on. Let's explore what some of these motives might be. Hey, welcome to Profiling Evil, and thanks for tuning in. Please hit that like and subscribe button, ring the bell, make sure you're sharing Profiling Evil with all your friends, and please give us a thumbs up. We really do appreciate it, and it helps us continue to grow. Brian Thompson, a 50-year-old man, was fatally shot in a premeditated attack as he prepared to attend an Investors Day conference at the Hilton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. Now, authorities are meticulously piecing this case together, looking at the evidence and pursuing all the leads in order to identify a gunman and uncover the reasons behind the deadly ambush. Now, I'm going to show that imagery of what happened in a bit, and I want to just warn you ahead of time, and I will warn you ahead of time in case you want to skip past that. New York's police commissioner, Jessica Tisch, who was just announced as police commissioner, said that this is a deliberate and premeditated attack. And while it might be, it seems a little premature to be saying it at this point, but I'm not holding any kind of judgment on this. Jessica Tisch has never been a police officer. In fact, until she was sworn in, she was serving as the sanitation head for the city of New York. So again, that doesn't really matter in this particular thing, but she emphasized in her briefing that the killing was not a random act of violence, but a premeditated, pre-planned, targeted event. And surveillance footage outside the Hilton Hotel captured a suspect who was waiting in wait for Thompson. The shooter, shown here, is masked and dressed in dark clothing, and he ambushed Thompson at 6:46 a.m., firing multiple shots that struck the CEO in the back and in the leg. Now, as Thompson fell to the ground, the gunman approached and fired additional rounds before fleeing across the street, grabbing an electric city bike, and heading toward Central Park. And I think it's important to note that this guy apparently had some experience with weapons because he cleared the weapon at least 3 or 4 times as he's shooting. So he was able to maintain still a stance of being able to shoot, keep target acquisition, and clear the weapon when it jammed on him. I found all of that to be kind of interesting, and I'll talk a little more about the weapon as we go on. But the investigators now are analyzing his movements. They're using surveillance footage and potential digital breadcrumbs to track the location of the killer before and after the attack. Now, the use of a city bike is pretty uncommon as a getaway vehicle. And I think it's going to be a focal point of the investigation because you have to swipe a card in order to get that, either a debit card or a credit card. But that was what was used to evade detection and get through traffic, which could be pretty difficult in normal situations. So let's explore what I believe are some of the key motivations for murder in this case. And I want to start off with something that we learned just a while ago, and that is that there was a Department of Justice probe on insider stock sales going on. That one of the most compelling leads, in my opinion, for the investigators to resolve is going to be around this federal antitrust investigation into UnitedHealthcare Group, this parent company of UnitedHealthcare, which Brian Thompson was heading up. And I hope I've got it all right based on public records that I've looked at, but the Department of Justice was scrutinizing whether the company's acquisitions violated antitrust laws by consolidating its marketing position. Now, according to sources familiar with the probe, that's what's going on here. And news of the investigation, which broke in late February, caused UnitedHealth's stocks to drop significantly. And this is where things got kind of interesting because Thompson, along with several other top executives in the organization, reportedly sold millions of dollars in company stock just weeks before the DOJ probe became public. That means that they went ahead of the schedule and sold the stock. Thompson's stock alone totaled more than $15.1 million, part of a combined with this group of people who sold $101 million sold by these executives, which included a couple of other people. The timing of these transactions, which reportedly took place even though Thompson's stock options were far from expiration, raised serious question about the potential of insider trading. And so that's going to be really interesting to see what happened and to see who was injured by that and if they might have motive for murder. Corporate governance experts have noted that such transactions are typically reviewed by the company's legal counsel to ensure that they're compliant and that they're disclosing everything that's going on. Well, law enforcement is now investigating whether these trades, the ensuing federal scrutiny, or the financial losses that were tied to the probe played a role in Thompson's murder. So that's going to be the first big thing that they're going to try to either validate or exclude. Another thing that I've read about as I've studied this case today is this cybersecurity breach that happened at UnitedHealth Group. And if we go back in time just a little bit, the group that Thompson was over faced intense challenges way beyond this antitrust investigation. Earlier this year, the company suffered one of the largest data breaches in U.S. history, compromising private information of people like you and me. Up to 1/3 of all Americans had their information at least compromised, including social security numbers and health data. So that was a huge deal. And that ransomware attack led to the company paying $22 million in ransom, with estimated financial losses surpassing $700 million. Now remember, Thompson was CEO of the UnitedHealthcare. He was in a very highly visible position overseeing the company's response to the crises. Now this is all built on what I'm finding publicly. So I can only say that it's right now being reported publicly that this is the case. So investigators are going to be probing into whether the breach, the subsequent fallout, or any associated threats could have contributed to the motive behind Brian Thompson's murder. We have to kind of consider the fact, too, that there might be a more intimate reason, and we'll touch on that in a minute. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Brian Thompson's role in his life. We call it the victimology. Thompson's professional prominence and personal life are coming under scrutiny now as investigators search for potential motives in this murder. Here's what we know. We know that he's married. He's the father of 2. He was a well-respected leader who rose through the ranks at UnitedHealthcare. He's been there for 20 plus years. He joined the company in 2004 as the director of corporate development, and he was promoted steadily through the ranks, eventually taking the helm of UnitedHealthcare, its insurance division, in 2021. So he's been in this position at least 3.5 years. Thompson was in New York City for a high-profile Investors Day conference that was going on when the shooting occurred. Now, his wife revealed, and again, this is through public reports that are coming out, that Thompson had been receiving threats tied to his role as the leader over the organization. Though the specifics of those threats remains unclear, we know that there had been some threats, and she told NBC News, basically, I don't know, for a lack of coverage, perhaps. So probably someone mad because they didn't have enough of their insurance covered. She said she didn't know the details, but there were some people who had been threatening her husband. Now, in addition to his professional achievements, Thompson was widely described as a family man who really enjoyed spending time with his wife and his 2 sons. Now, they lived in Minnesota in a 5-bedroom home, according to all reports. And apparently, if he sold a $15 million stock option out, they had a little bit of money. Of course, family, friends, and colleagues are just shocked and saddened. And many just refer to him as just this incredibly kind, generous, good-hearted leader and mentor. Well, police are aggressively pursuing all the leads that they can to follow up on who this shooter is and uncover any co-conspirators. I think it's important to just bring out the fact that the suspect, again, decided to use one of those city bikes, and I think it's going to become kind of a critical aspect of this investigation. The detectives are going to be analyzing rideshare records, surveillance cameras, and other digital evidence as they trace their movements. And we do have those movements as shown on this map that was released in the media. NYPD has also issued a $10,000 reward for information leading to the gunman's capture. But I don't think $10,000 is going to mean a whit to someone who would have done this or someone that knows them. We'll see what happens there. So authorities, again, are examining a couple of major things. The federal antitrust investigation, so whether the DOJ probe and its financial fallout has caused some resentment or retaliation, if that had something to do with it. Number 2, the cybersecurity breach that went on. And if this massive data leak and subsequent financial losses created enemies inside or outside of the company, that has to be resolved and figured out. Personal threats tied directly to Thompson's role as the UnitedHealthcare CEO. Was someone mad because they didn't get enough insurance coverage? Was there a grievance or a professional dispute of an employee? And then, whether we like it or not, we have to consider more intimate reasons for murder. And I think it goes without saying that Thompson's personal life is going to be completely dissected now, including the life of his wife and their relationship together, and her relationships inside and outside of the marriage. There's nothing being mentioned right now that would suggest there's an intimate reason for this murder, but we can't dismiss it at this point. And investigators have to really be careful not to get tunnel vision in this investigation and think it's this and ignore all other things that might redirect the investigation. So law enforcement will work with federal agencies, and given the high profile nature of a case like this, not only with federal investigators, but they're going to have to be working with corporate investigators as well. So now what I want to do is turn a little bit to the suspect in this case, or the suspectology, the study of the suspect, because I think the killing of Brian Thompson has prompted really intense scrutiny into the suspect's motivation, his behavior, and his background. And I think we're going to learn a lot about him as time goes on. But just watching the way in which he committed this homicide has caused me to think about things. Circumstances surrounding the crime suggest to me that this is not the work of an opportunistic predator who was hanging out on the street. But this was, like Commissioner Tisch said, the work of a calculated, deliberate killer, someone who had specific intent. And so I want to talk about some of the key aspects of suspectology that I think warrant some exploration in this thing. And I'm saying all of this based on the way in which this suspect handled that weapon and committed the homicide, all based on the behavior I've seen in that short little video. So the shooter, in my opinion, displayed a degree of proficiency with firearms, evidenced by his ability to quickly clear jams while continuing to keep target acquisition, keep that weapon focused on the intended target. To me, it suggests that there is a familiarity with firearm mechanics. That would suggest either prior training, experience, or practice. So the suspect might have military or law enforcement experience, or a hobbyist who loves to go out to the range and shoot a weapon. I also think this killer had some confidence in high-stress situations, as, in my opinion, evident by clearing that jam mid-attack multiple times without hesitation or panic. I think it reflects some real composure and focus. And I think investigators will have to explore whether the suspect has connections to gun ranges, tactical training facilities, or military affiliations. And frankly, I don't know that we're going to see that this killer is actually from New York City, but may have come in knowing that Thompson was going to be at this meeting. Now, the second thing I thought was kind of interesting is it appears that there was pre-planning and clearly target selection. Brian Thompson was the target, and the evidence is pointing to this premeditation. I think the suspect knew Thompson's schedule, and he was laying in wait. This would suggest either prior surveillance or insider information. I think the suspect demonstrated a single-minded focus on Thompson, nobody else, ignoring people even around him, showing no signs of diversion, and certainly no signs that this was just opportunistic in nature. I think this pre-planning implies that the shooter had a specific motive, and that motive was to kill Brian Thompson. It may have been professional grievances. I mean, was this killer somehow connected to Thompson's role at work, or in the DOJ investigation, or the data breach, or inside trading, or something more personal? Was there a personal grievance or vendetta, a perceived wrongdoing by Thompson in his leadership capacity that led to something like this? And you have to think about, was it someone who was contracted, a hit by hire of a third party? But again, I just feel like this was a little more personal, and I don't believe that killer was a professional. They were proficient, but I don't believe they were a professional hitman. The other thing I thought was kind of interesting about this killer was the tunnel vision and the lack of attention that the killer had to bystanders. In my opinion, the shooter was exhibiting tunnel vision, focused only on Thompson, and ignoring potential witnesses, like the person who was standing to Thompson's right, standing right there witnessing this, and then runs past the shooter to get away, and a person that was sitting in a vehicle to the left of Thompson. Now, it would have been to Thompson's right once he turned around. This behavior, to me, suggests that the shooter was singularly focused on Thompson and nothing else, and he had no concern for collateral damage or even capture. So it makes you kind of think about and point to the idea of psychological conditioning first and foremost. Was this person trained to block out distractions, or really were they so focused on Thompson that they just didn't see anything else? When someone is focused on carrying out a mission without extraneous violence, somebody like a professional hitman, this is the kind of person that might be able to do that and just ignore all of the noise happening around them. But again, I just at this point don't believe this was a professional hit. I might end up being surprised. And even if this person was hired to kill Thompson, I don't believe it's something they do as a living, for a living. So I don't think this was an opportunistic predator. The calculated nature of the attack sets this suspect apart from common street criminals. The suspect, in my opinion, wasn't just lingering aimlessly in the area. They came to that location with a purpose, and they left. He left immediately after completing the task of murder. Now, that was kind of interesting, using a city bike as a getaway vehicle, because just running through the streets of New York would be a little difficult. Getting in a car could be really problematic, but a city bike suggests the ability to blend in rather than fleeing. And then, of course, he goes to Central Park, where he can then hide in the trees and change his clothes. All of this, to me, points to a more sophisticated and purposeful individual who likely has a stable living condition and is not part of the transient or opportunistic crime demographic of people on the streets of New York City. It all just kind of points back to that. So based on the psychological and behavioral traits, again, based on a very short video that we're able to watch, I think this suspect has high impulse control. The shooter's focus and lack of erratic behavior suggests that he was deliberate and disciplined. But again, I'm not saying a professional hitman, but he was deliberate and disciplined. He was willing to carry out a brazen attack in a public space, and I think that indicates some level of confidence, and in a level of confidence in their ability to avoid being captured. And I believe whoever committed this homicide was motivated by some strong belief or anger or something. It could include ideological issues, financial issues, or deeply personal issues. So to wrap our minds around what might cause someone to commit such a targeted attack, we and investigators need to consider, number one, the professional motivations. The suspect may have felt wronged by Thompson in some way, a decision made at the corporate level, something in the healthcare sphere, or it could have been someone who was denied coverage, suffered a loss because of a layoff or a whistleblowing retaliation or something like that. We have to think about that DOJ investigation and how stock sales could have really impacted and financially caused injury to somebody in the company or its competitors. From an ideological standpoint, we have to think the CEO of the largest insurance company out there was Thompson, and he might have been targeted by somebody with opposition toward corporate healthcare practices. We have seen some really interesting things going on in our country in the last couple of years, so who knows? But I think it's important to point out that there were behavioral and logistical clues to this thing and to the killer. Number one was the surveillance abilities. The shooter had familiarity with Thompson's schedule, I believe, and that suggests either inside information or surveillance. The killer, I believe, spent time either purchasing firearms, that particular firearm, a silencer, ammunition, the backpack he was wearing, getting ready for the bike, all of those things, and there might be a forensic trail that can be followed in that regard. Bottom line, the suspect's behavior and the nature of the crime strongly suggest a calculated, motive-driven individual rather than just some random, opportunistic attacker that was wandering the streets of New York City. This was, as the commissioner said, most likely a targeted act of violence, rooted in some kind of grievance or driven by purpose. So investigators are going to have to delve into the shooter's potential connections to Thompson, to his professional or personal life, in order to uncover the driving force behind this chilling act. You know, I also find myself continuing to reflect back on that weapon that was used. I haven't heard if police have released what kind of weapon it was, but it appears to me, just from the reaction of Thompson when the shooting occurs, that it was a smaller caliber weapon. So with that in mind, I wanted to share a few more thoughts on the weapon and why I'm kind of thinking it's a smaller caliber weapon. But again, we might be surprised when the real facts come out. But the use of a smaller caliber weapon, particularly in conjunction with a suppressor, is not uncommon for professional hitmen or at least highly motivated attackers. Somebody who's familiar with firearms, studies it, reads it, watches movies. This choice can depend on several factors, including the operational settings of the weapon. And as I try to kind of think through this process, there are a couple of reasons why someone might use a smaller caliber weapon in the city. Number one, sound suppression. Smaller caliber handguns like the .22 long rifle are preferred by killers at times when paired with suppressors, silencers, because they produce less noise than large caliber weapons. So this makes the shooter less conspicuous in populated areas, even like Midtown Manhattan. There's also, when you're shooting a smaller caliber weapon, a less recoil. So, when you think about the Clint Eastwood movies and his gun firing up like this, a small caliber weapon, there's going to be less recoil, allowing for faster, more precise follow-up shots. And we see this guy clearing the weapon and continuing to shoot. This is crucial in executing these controlled targeted hits, especially when multiple shots are fired. Now, smaller caliber weapons like a .22 lack stopping power that you might find in a big gun like a .44 Magnum, the Clint Eastwood gun. But they still can be incredibly lethal when aimed at vital areas, center mass. So, a professional might rely on multiple shots to achieve the desired effect of killing someone. And it appears that this man was shot multiple times. Smaller handguns are easier to conceal, making them ideal in urban settings where the shooter has to blend into the crowd. So again, another reason for a smaller caliber weapon. And again, I might be surprised and it may come back that it was a bigger caliber weapon, but I really think we're going to find that this is something in the .22 range or the .380 range. But we'll see what happens on this. Now, another reason why I'm thinking that this is a smaller caliber weapon is Brian Thompson's reaction when he was shot. You see him in the video, he kind of flinches and spins around to the left, and then he goes down and flinches at his leg when he's struck, I believe, in the left leg. That could indicate a smaller caliber weapon, feeling the infliction of the weapon, the bullet striking you, but not having the kinetic energy to knock you to the ground like you would see with a large caliber weapon. That's also kind of evidenced by the delayed collapse that we saw in the victim's body as he makes his way over to the wall and around the third or fourth shot then collapses to the ground. Smaller rounds can cause serious damage to internal organs, but it might take just a little bit of time for that damage to really sink in and take effect. So with all of this discussion, I think the thing that's important is the use of a small caliber weapon is not definitive proof that this was a professional hitman, but it might have been prioritized decision making that it's a weapon that fit better for the situation or was more available to the shooter. And so I think we'll have to wait and see what kind of information comes out. We're going to have to learn about what the intent of the shooter was. Was the goal to inflict pain or draw attention to what's going on? Or was it truly to execute this man? And I believe it was to execute this man. We're going to have to look at the shot placement. And was that shot placement consistent with someone who had been trained to shoot in a certain way? And it was the victim, in this case, executed with that last shot? Was it a final shot that would have ensured success? So all of those are going to be really important questions that are going to need to be answered by the investigation. Again, I think it's going to be interesting to see the delayed response that the victim had and the kind of weapon that this was. And all of this is going to be answered rather quickly because not only are they going to most likely recover bullets from inside of the victim's body, but they will have already recovered bullet casings. And we could see from the crime scene imagery that they had tents placed out throughout that crime scene. Most likely, those tents were placed over bullet casings, where you see each of those little numbers with the little yellow tent over the top of them. So this one's going to be interesting to watch. This murder is sending shockwaves through the healthcare and business community. United Health Group has already issued a statement calling Brian Thompson's death a tremendous loss. And boy, who wouldn't think that something like this is a tremendous loss? I have such a sorrowful feeling for his family, for his wife and his two sons, who are now trying to grapple with losing their father and husbands. But I believe New York City police detectives are determined to bring the killer to justice in this case. And I think that the community can rest assured that this isn't some wild-eyed killer running the streets that's going to be attacking people opportunistically. I think this was, in fact, a targeted event. I think the suspect is going to be arrested quite quickly in this particular case. But again, I've been wrong so many times, who knows what may really happen. But I think there are people out here who are opining that this is a professional hit. I think it's much more personal and done by somebody who's proficient in firearms, but not a hitman or a trained killer. It's awfully early to be speculating, but those are my initial thoughts, and I just wanted to share them with you. And I hope you'll share your thoughts back with me by commenting down below. And please take time to enter comments to other comments that are made by your peers on this platform, so that we can kind of learn and explore this together. I think we're in the very early stages of this investigation, but again, I truly believe that we're going to see an arrest come pretty darn quickly in this case. I want to reiterate, I don't believe that it was opportunistic. I believe that this was a targeted attack based on some of the things that we're starting to hear come out in the news. So there you go, folks. Hey, remember that you can find Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And if you like audio podcasts, make sure you're checking out Profiling Evil podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. And I hope you're trying out our new playlist, Twisted Tales. It's an exploration of cases that are just not talked about much anymore, but are really intriguing, and it gives us a place to teach investigative principles without all the emotion of cases like this one today, where we are just so taken aback by the murder of Brian Thompson. Hey, please take a moment and go over to Profiling Evil's website and check out our unsolved homicides and missing persons global map. It's a place where you can go in and enter cases from your own community. And if you happen to be personally tied to a case, you can even enter a video that can be watched by others as they do some exploring about the many, many murder cases and many, many missing person cases around the world. Give it a try, and while you're there, check out our story maps and our other content on the webpage. Heck, while you're there, consider the fact that with the Christmas holiday approaching, this is a great place for you to pick up a couple of my books, Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult, or She Knew No Fear. And if you live in the United States, I'll ship those books to you for free. And I'll even personalize them as part of your gift-giving process, either for yourself or for somebody that you know that's a true crime enthusiast. So please take advantage of that. And thanks so much for your support of Profiling Evil. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.